Right, Kieran, what is tip number 3, please?
So I think tip number 3 ties in. It's be explicit when modelling for colleagues.
Yeah, let's dive into this then.
So like I said, I think this comes from reading Allen and Sims' Teacher Gap, where they talk about small, actionable teaching assignments and the idea that some schools improve their teachers better than others, and it's usually through specificity. So when colleagues are watching me teach, I'll ask them to focus on one thing, and vice versa when I'm watching them. It won't be your old school, this lesson was a good or an outstanding lesson. It'd be, okay, how did the worked examples go? Was there sufficient difference between the consecutive examples, and being really, really specific in what exactly it was. And I actually saw the benefit of this the other day, because one of our early career teachers, we'd been working specifically on routines and behaviours. And as I was taking some people around the school, and happened to be in her class. She was using many whiteboards, and they had a signal for when they were ready to continue. She had a system for checking different parts of the class at different times, and then she was ready to move in. And I was all, this is, she's executing this better than I could ever have imagined. But that's because we spent 3 weeks only looking at that part of her practice, because she's going to be a teacher for 30 years. There has to be something that she learns in year 2, learns in year 3. So I find that really helpful. I think one caveat is that safeguarding is an exception. If there's something to do with that, then that needs to be addressed at the right time. But what I took from reading Allen and Sims, and then there's an American book called I can't remember, the name escapes me right now, but it's basically an exploration of business and education. Learning to Improve is the name. And they take examples from business that might apply to education, and they said something very similar. When the feedback you give and the criteria is more specific, you're more likely to enact change. And so that's something we've been doing for a while, and I think it again, it's what you do with the pupils, but let's do it with the teachers as well.
This is great, Kieran. Right, a couple of follow-ups on this. So the first thing is the Teacher Gap. That's a brilliant book, isn't it? Hey, I don't think that gets the attention it deserves. That's one of the best ones I've ever read. It's and again, Becky Allen and Sam are absolutely brilliant. But I'll tell you one thing. She's not returning my emails at the moment, Becky Allen, so she's in my bad books. So I'm trying to get her on here again, but so I've gone off for a little bit. But I will say that book is absolutely excellent. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But I'm really interested in this, Kieran. This. Firstly, I love that point that let's just focus on one thing. She's going to be teaching for 30 years. There's no rush. That ties in with a lot of things that have been said on tips for teachers about not trying to accelerate your career too much. Just taking your time, focusing on one thing, getting better at that, and then moving on. I love that. But I'm really interested in the practicalities of this. So let's imagine you're working with an early careers teacher. Firstly, who decides the focus? Is that, did you suggest things? Do they suggest things? How does the focus come about?
I mean, I think it's changed since the early career framework was brought into place. I mean, this is the end of the first academic year, but there's a real roadmap for generic sort of pedagogy that we can follow. Obviously, my support is often math specific, but I think that there's a lot of crossover, and so. Before the framework, I would use my knowledge of my practice and what I thought was effective teaching, and we'd codify what we thought effective teaching looked like. And so it's almost a combination of both now, where there will be some math-specific things that I focus on, but a lot of things will work just as well with the new framework.
Got it. And if let's say you're working with a specific teacher and you've agreed on a focus, whatever it may be, let's say it's worked examples or whatever, what would the conversation before the lesson where you watch them look like? Would you be saying, look, I'm literally just going to be focusing on this one thing, so don't worry about anything else? What does that conversation be? Because the reason I'm asking you this, Kieran, is often there isn't a conversation before a kind of supporting observation like this, and it feels to me like that conversation is quite important.
It is, and it was probably more important for me at the start, because I needed to establish that I wasn't in my schools as another stick to beat the teachers with, because they've been through, the only constant was change for quite a while. But I've removed myself from the accountability process. My notes are my notes because my working memory is limited, and I need to remember this conversation at 6 p.m. because I might be working with a teacher at 9, 10 and 11, and then plan with someone in the afternoon. So I think it's very important that you establish that this is, getting better, not because we need to, but because we have to, or not because we can. And I think the more experienced a teacher is, the more freedom I think they have to decide where they're coming from. But generally, I think the things I introduce will be just beyond normal practice enough that they'll think, oh, I'd quite like to get better at that thing we talked about at your staff meeting.
Got it. And just a final one on this, and it's the obvious question. What does the conversation afterwards look like? Is it, do you start it with the classic, how do you think that went? Or what do those conversations play out like?
It depends on if I've done the teaching or not. So I'll ask them, what did you notice if I was the teacher? And I probably will start with, how did you think that went? But again, being really specific to, how did that worked example work? What did you notice about the pupils' responses? Because I think, it's very easy for us to give value judgments on ourselves. Oh, it was terrible, they weren't listening, that kind of thing. But actually, that's not important. Were the questions similar enough that we could draw generalizations? So I think normally very informal, because we're doing very important work, but we can almost build this relationship where it's supportive, because we want everybody to be the best teachers so the pupils get the best education we can possibly have.
Just a final point on this. So Chris Such, who I know obviously you know very well, was on the show a few episodes ago, and he talked a lot about depressurising learning, and one of his strategies was that as a teacher he'd make a mistake fairly early on when he meets a class, just to show that everybody's human, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake and so on. It almost feels like that, kind of depressurising this coaching or this observation feels like an important thing. Would you ever, I'm not saying that, I do this without even knowing, but would you ever deliberately do something suboptimally for two reasons? Just so, one, you've got something to talk about, and two, it kind of takes you off your pedestal and the teacher realises that everybody's human, or does that not feel like a good idea?
I haven't done it on purpose, but when I do make a mistake, because no lesson's ever going to be perfect, I will own it and I'll say, well, that wasn't ideal. What can we do to improve that next time? And because what have we got? We've got a 3-form, a 2-form, and a 1-form. There are lots and lots of teachers, so I will have these conversations openly in the staff room about where I've gone wrong. So I think, maybe in the future I will plant mistakes, but you don't have to look very far to see mistakes that are getting made in a lesson anyway.
Can I ask you just one bonus on this, Kieran? Now, apologies for keep digging into this, but I'm just fascinated. I can see this model working really well in your school, where obviously you know the staff, you probably know most of the kids, and you can do this. I'll teach this lesson, you teach the next, maybe we'll do it together, and so on. Let's just say you were kind of transported into another school where perhaps you're an external consultant or whatever you are. Would you still do the kind of I'll teach? Do you think that's still the best way to start this process for them to watch the strategies you're talking about in action? Or is the fact that you're not familiar with the school, the pupils, is that too much of a barrier?
It's always tough. The strength of teaching comes from knowing your pupils, doesn't it? But I think that we want to almost disarm anyone who we're looking to support. He's going to put his money where his mouth is. Because it's very easy for people to come in and say, do this, and do this. I'll be back in 2 weeks to check up on you. I think I got a lot of currency from my teachers, and I think I would in other schools if I sort of was the one who led. Because then I think people who are reticent get a bit of breathing space and think, okay, this isn't so bad.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's brilliant.